question that I was asked was, well, what do I do if I don't have confidence going forward? You know, I'm drawn to, as I understood it, I'm drawn to follow this spiritual path or a spiritual path. But how do I know it's the right thing? How do I know it's not going to just end in nothing? And then a lot of time will have been wasted and all that sort of thing. And that there's doubts and uncertainties, even about the existence of God. I talk about it so casually, but, you know, how do we know? In the context of Ananda, as I mentioned last night, we often talk about God as Divine Mother. It's a very long and subtle subject, and if there's more interest in it, I can talk more about it. But it was when I first visited Ananda for the first time, which was in August of 1970, which was the ashram, the only community we had at that time, up in the mountains, very remote. I had met Swami Kriyananda. I absolutely, with my whole heart, wanted to be part of his life and this world and the ashram, but I really didn't know very much. I was doubly ignorant, which is I didn't know, there was so much I didn't know that I didn't know what I didn't know. So I was in the guest reception, little house there, the reception house, and there was this gentleman nearby, and he was in his mid-20s, you know, approximately the same age as me, and he was talking to another man there, and he was saying, at that time we were always scrambling to make money, because we were way out in the wilderness and we were just trying to survive. And he had apparently started a little jewelry business. I'll tell you the whole context. He started a little jewelry business, but we didn't have hardly any buildings. But there was an abandoned bread truck, a van, on the property. And so he converted the inside of the property into a little shop, and he started making jewelry out of found things. Manzanita wood that he cut into little rounds, hollowed it out, put dried flowers in. It was actually quite charming, and he actually did pretty well with it. And so, it was an enterprise. He ended up becoming a gemologist, and I mean, he started with manzanita and ended with precious stones and gold and silver, as decades went by. So he put it in the bread truck, and he had it there, and it was all going great. Then some other person, we were not highly coordinated in those days, decided the bread truck was an eyesore and pulled it over to someplace and pushed it over a cliff off our property. So this was the whole context that I didn't know. So he's saying to this other man, I started the business because I thought Mother wanted me to, but it seemed that Mother had a different idea, and so she just pushed the bread truck over the cliff, and so now I'm not sure what Mother wants. My thought was, he's awfully old just to be doing what his mother wants. And what kind of a mother would treat her son like this? And then when I heard they were talking about Divine Mother, it was not better, it was worse. It was much worse. Like, just who are these people? I was very certain of Swami, but I didn't know who any of these people were. Later on, I went to work in the kitchen, and the woman, I was totally incompetent. I was willing, but I was totally incompetent. She asked me to do something like, I think, make creamed potatoes or some very simple dish, and I had no idea how to make it. And she goes, Mother, why do you send me people like this? And once again, I'm thinking, who the heck is she talking to? It's like, she's old compared to me. She was half my age that I am now, but she seemed real old to me. So it was just like, it didn't make any sense at all. And then, even a little bit later, I presented to Swami Kriyananda some terrible dilemma that I was facing. And he very kindly said to me, well, just offer it to Divine Mother. And then I waited for him to give me some advice, and that seemed sufficient advice as far as he was concerned. Not as far as I was concerned. I didn't have the foggiest idea what that meant on any level. Time passes. I'm like, I would probably, maybe 10 years later, some poor soul comes to me with some difficulty, and I lovingly hold their hands and say, don't worry about it, just give it to Divine Mother. And they would, no! When did it happen? When did it change? And there was no point where I could say, now I understand. But all that time in between, I was taking every step that made sense to me, because I was on a road I'd never walked before. I wasn't on a road that had never been walked on before, but it was a road that I had never walked on. But I never took a step that was bigger than my capacity to commit to it. You know, I didn't just say, well, I'm going to throw myself over. Every step was the same size as I was. But if you just keep doing that with complete authenticity, in the early days of Ananda, in many ways it was much better. In early days, I'm talking 50 years, because we were totally unformed and we didn't know what we were doing. So there was no way you could just adopt the culture, because there was no visible culture to adopt. We were just a bunch of crazy kids out in the wilderness, basically. And Swami himself, many years later, he became a figure of reverence in many countries and thousands of people. But at that time, he was in his early 40s, and he was just a great guy. But when you saw anything, it was because you actually perceived it. It was not because everybody around you was telling you how you had to behave. And it's impossible. Everything develops. You have to organize it a little. We try to organize it the minimum, but you have to organize it a little. It's not helpful to people. Most people don't enjoy chaos. Some of us love it, but others don't enjoy it. So a culture grows up, and then you sort of get caught between trying to match the culture and trying to be authentic. And all of these are just the karma of the situation. Now, that's part of it, and that's an extension of what I said last night. But there's another aspect to it, which is I have no capacity to evaluate the consciousness of these masters. I knew Swami Kriyananda personally, and I got to see him in the cold light of day for more than 4 decades in all kinds of situations. So I had real objective realities, but still, I could not evaluate his consciousness because it's the top of the mountain, and I don't live at the top of the mountain. I live much closer to the base. As he said himself when he was writing about his guru, Yogananda, he says, how does the ant describe Mount Everest? The perspective of the ant is simply not large enough. So to try to decide, well, are these true masters? I mean, we have a lot of history on Christ, which may make you positive or negative, but there's a lot of history on that one. But you can't really tell. You go into an ashram, you can't tell if the guru is really the guru, because we don't have, as Swami said once about Yogananda, you can't evaluate someone's actions when you're not even clear what their objective is. Because with Swami, what I learned with him was, I'm a bright girl, and I have confidence in my intelligence, and I, too much sometimes. It's one of my loving friends said to me, Asha, you're not right as often as you think you are, which was very helpful, and I've been very grateful for it. And I often remind myself of that. But it's better to have the courage to follow what you think than to be too afraid. I'd rather, just make a mess of it than to be too afraid to try, because you'll never learn anything if you never try. At least if you try, you've learned something. Global humiliation might follow, but nonetheless, you've learned that you can live through even that, like, so what? But with Swamiji, what I began to figure out was, I had a perspective, and it would be like a perspective that would be like this big, and I would understand things because they would enter my screen here, they would cross it, and I could put those pieces together. And it wouldn't be that I was wrong, but I realized that Swami's perspective started over here and was going into a world I couldn't see. I mean, just even literally, I would see a person's life in the present. He would see where it had come from, and he could see where it was going. I mean, even outside of this incarnation. And when you talk about God-realized masters, you're just talking about things that, I mean, we can talk clever, but I don't know what I'm talking about. So you might have an intuition. I had a profound intuition about Swami Kriyananda the first time, literally, that I saw him in this life. I just recognized him. I knew him from the past. I'd already been through the authenticating phase before I met him this time. So there was no issue. when I was writing his book, people said, well, why don't you talk about how your relationship with him evolved? I said, it didn't. It just was the same from the first moment to now. I've evolved, thank God, and so that I know more about what I'm looking at. But I didn't have to work for it. I worked for it in past lives. But what I'm saying is, if you feel attracted to this path or any other path, when you're dealing with masters, you have to, the most effective way for you to evaluate it is to look at the people who have dedicated themselves to practicing what it is you're learning how to practice, to attuning themselves to what you're learning how to attune yourself to, because that's the fruit of the tree. This was the question that was asked of Jesus. Jesus was asked, how can you tell a true prophet from a false prophet? And his answer was, by the fruits. He said, a good tree gives good fruit, a bad tree gives bad fruit. And it's easier to see the fruit sometimes than you can understand the tree itself. Now, bear in mind, people follow a teaching with different degrees of capacity to understand what they're doing, or commitment to it. So it's not like every single person who calls themselves this or that. You have to use your discrimination all the way through. You don't have to judge people, but you have to use your brain. Saint Teresa of Avila, who set up these cloistered convents, in Spain some centuries ago, and there were 18 nuns, and they went into a state of perpetual cloister. And it wasn't easy to come out once you'd gone in. It was considered a great sin against God. So these 18 women would they'd go into the cloister and they'd slam the gate behind them, and then for the rest of their lives they'd live together. So no surprise, St. Teresa said, great care must be exercised in choosing those 18 women, And she talked about certain qualities. She said, the first quality that you have to look for is common sense. She said, everything else, including devotion to God, can be learned, but you have to start with common sense. So even in what I'm saying, you have to use your common sense. But if you see even one or two examples of individuals who look like who you would like to become, and I'll use it, if the sound of the music and the way people relate to each other is what you're aspiring to become, that is a true measure of who the masters are. And if you go to different ashrams, which I've only done a little bit of, but I've done enough, the spirit is very, very different one from another. Some are very austere, some are very monastically oriented, some are, I always use the phrase, some are in black and white and some are in color. Some are funny, some of them never laugh. It's just everybody has a different way. And so you have to find, it's not just a question of practicality, it's just like, do I want to be like these people? And when you see, and this is where, Ananda in New Zealand is smaller than Ananda in California, but with the internet you can meet people all over the world these days. Just everybody. I meet people in New York who did all their meditation study and their initiation with my friends in Mumbai. And it's almost like, how did you even find them? Narayani and Shurjo, who run the Mumbai Center, where actually Aryavan and Shivani and Ishani live. But you find, and you get to sort of see all these different ones. And if there's something consistent in it that attracts you, you have to overcome doubt yourself. You have to have experience yourself. But you can also use your common sense to evaluate it. You find people who are in tune with what you're trying to be in tune with. Oh, and what I was starting to say, Swamiji said, if you meet one or two individuals, you can say, well, they're special. But if you meet many individuals who have certain qualities that are attractive to you, you have to at least ask the question, well, it must be what they're doing, because they all couldn't have been just born like this. This is especially true when you start traveling the world, and which I've been doing, and Dambara and I have been doing together now for a while. And there's just a quality to people who follow this path that suits me. You know, it's always been that way. So that's a longer answer to the question you asked, because it seemed like it was implied in it was a lot more. Okay? And I'm glad you're here. Otherwise I would have had to send you the tape. So, any other questions that I'm going to repeat as soon as you say it? Okay, the question has to do with if thoughts create our own reality, what about the aging process of the body? What are the limits of that teaching, in essence? I've been involved in whatever you call this movement, spiritual movement, New Age movement, all of this, as I keep mentioning, for a very long time. And so I've seen a lot of cycles come and go. Because I found my path immediately and never wavered, I'm not an expert in anything else. But as consciousness begins to rise on this planet, which I was talking about some last night, a lot of lovely plants start coming up, right? And what happens is a lot of people become very excited about something that they've understood, and it has power for them, and as is natural, it's the nature of joy to want to share itself. And a generous-hearted person will become excited about something and want to tell everyone about it. Here, as for example, Exhibit A, who's standing right here, who's done exactly that for exactly that reason. It makes me extremely happy to tell you about the things that have made me so happy, right? But the difficulty is, sometimes a person is like a third of the way up the mountain, and because, and this is just one of these things that is the positive and the negative of our time. One of the positives of our time is that we are not interested in dogma, we are not interested in priestly intervention, we are not interested in being told that somebody else is in charge of our spiritual development. And simultaneously with that, Autobiography of a Yogi is one of the most influential books in this whole awakening consciousness, and it's all about gurus and disciples. So you have these two forces that are interesting, playing with each other. One is this absolute declaration that I'm in charge and I'll do it my way, and the other is this influence from India, specifically and enormously through Autobiography of a Yogi, which is talking about lineage. That it isn't that we're making this up. The fact that it's my individual responsibility and my personal experience is true, but not without boundaries, not without guidance, not without some parameters that don't just cause me to go baying after God knows what, you know, the first shiny thing I see. And so people without lineage, and this is just a little side thing. I had some conversations when we were in Texas, in the US, some time ago, in September, I think, last year. And I was talking to 30-somethings, and one of them was actually the daughter of a very prominent yoga pioneer in the world. And we started talking about lineage and about, you know, all the teachers are gone, and, you know, because there used to be this plethora. It's not worth going into all the details. But I realized that these poor kids didn't have any lineage. They were just kids. I don't mean to say that. I was not a kid when I was 30, and they aren't either. But they've somehow lost the idea that there's a source for these teachings, and that we're not making it up, and that there are individuals who know more than we do. So what happens is you get a lot of semi-true teaching. And when I was in California, I would get what I used to call refugees from the New Age, because they would come in and say things almost, not exactly, but close to what you're saying. I have a chronic allergy, and I know that I make my reality, and I know that I can heal myself, and I keep trying to heal myself, and I can't heal myself. So they then are collapsed because they've been given a teaching that told them they had a certain power, which they self-evidently don't have. And so it puts, I only ever even offer this if I'm asked, because it's not my place to undermine people's faith. I said it's an almost true teaching. That's the problem. There's enough truth in it that you can play it out to a certain extent, and if your karma and your horoscope is cooperating with your intention, you'll get the impression that you have more power than you actually have until you hit the point where you don't. Because we don't create our own reality. Did you birth yourself? You know, when your day of death comes, are you going to just be able to say, no, thank you, I'm just going to stay? And, you know, when you're going bald, can you make your hair grow again? And just the things that you're saying. I'm of an age, too. I'm traveling. We have 11 suitcases in our little entourage. Don't ask me why, but we do. Okay, like that. I am completely useless. You know, I carry a book. I used to be able to lift 100 pounds. I was so strong. And now if I do, you know, oh, my back, you know. And I'm tremendously energetic. But it's not there like it used to be. I can't open the darn toothpaste sometimes, you know. It's just, I don't have it. And because there are physical laws, there are laws of the universe. Now, Jesus could do it.
Yes.
It's not, you see, the teaching is not false. It can be done. It can be done, but you have to have more energy to shift the pattern than the pattern has to continue as it is. It's a complete interplay of magnetism. And so the principle is there. And Babaji, who's the second over there on that side, Babaji, as I was saying last night, is an immortal in India. He continually regenerates his body, and he looks like a young man. No one even knows how many centuries old he is. This is not uncommon in the Indian tradition or in Indian life. Jesus was, you know, dead on the cross. And then on Easter morning he wasn't. Well, what do you know? And for 40 days, he didn't just, you know, rise up that one time and then disappear. For 40 days he walked around with the disciples. My favorite of all, of course, there's many favorites in the Bible. I love the life of Jesus. It's magnificent. But my favorite is when he's on the beach at the Sea of Galilee, and they have the rock now inside a little chapel. I've taken pilgrimage there, and they call it the Table of the Lord. I love the way these things build up. It's in Latin, but what it is the Table of the Lord, because it was the rock on which Jesus was frying fish. He made breakfast for the disciples. You know, they got so excited because they saw him. They jumped out of the boat and ran through the water. And Jesus says, you know, bring some fish. I'm frying fish. I mean, it wasn't like he was, lo, here I am again, you know, like this. He was making breakfast for them. He was there because he just played with time and space and life and death and matter, because his energy to shift the pattern was greater than the energy that holds the pattern, like that. But let's be real, mine isn't, and neither is yours. You know, now where we can create our reality is not on the level of changing the material world. It's changing our own relationship to it and how we feel. And that's the power that really counts, because if we can experience, if we can choose our experience of the forces that we can't shift, then what difference does it make what the forces are doing? If our happiness, our well-being, our security, our self-definition, our self-worth depends on circumstances that are outside of our control, we are always scared and we are always vulnerable. No matter how much bravado we put on, no matter how deeply unconscious those fears are, we're always afraid. Of course we are. And so what the real spiritual path is not, oh, I'm going to manifest a car, I'm going to manifest a job. But don't misunderstand. As you gain mastery over energies, you can make a lot happen in this world. But it's just a matter of being realistic in it still. But what the real power on the spiritual path, well, my friend Jaya, who's a peer of mine, is a founding member of Ananda, and he is one of the leaders in India. And when you go to India, people ask you very bold questions like, have you had cosmic consciousness? Are you God realized? You know what? And then the word is siddhi, which means a yogic power. You know, like to turn water into wine would be considered a siddhi. To resurrect your body after you die is a siddhi. To be able to levitate, to be in two places at the same time, which are all, you know, demonstrable things that saints can do. Padre Pio, an Italian priest, he could be in two places at the same time. The people, the American soldiers who were coming to bomb Italy at some point or something like that, they saw him in the sky. They didn't drop their bombs. You know, he was just there protecting his people. I mean, these are just, I mean, it's not, in other words, it's not ancient, it's modern too. And he was a great saint. He was just this priest. Not just this priest, but he was this priest. I think he's been canonized by now. But coming to all of this, let me think where I was. What was I saying? Pardon me? Oh, yes, about Jaya. So they asked him, what siddhi does he have? What powers does he have? And, you know, the answer is no, he can't turn water into wine. He can't appear in two places. He travels on an airplane. He can't just, you know, project himself to another spot. None of those things. But he's very thoughtful. And he stopped for a while and he said, I have the power to choose happiness. Now, you can always buy a bottle of wine. But think about that, you know? And that's this lineage, you see. This lineage puts it in perspective. I mean, by no means are we the only lineage, but because there's a lineage that is at the top of the mountain watching us come up, it's easier to know which way to go. If you're just all standing together and someone has learned this much, it may be very helpful to you. It's not my place to have an opinion even. But when asked, this is what I say. Work on you can control your consciousness, but I mean, if you're capable, but see, if you were capable of stopping the aging process and making your body young again, you wouldn't ask me. You'd just walk in here and look 40 and I would think that you were your wife's son, that's all. And I would just leave it to you two to work that out. All right, another question?
I've made that mistake with two ladies about which one was mother but they were sisters.
I'm sorry, you'll have to speak a little.
I've made that mistake of which one was whether they were sisters or whether they were mother and daughter.
Yeah.
Because if you launch into mother and daughter and you got it wrong, oh my goodness.
I think we've all learned our lesson the hard way. I actually have been surprised many, many times that people who I think are much older than me are actually the same age as me. I finally stopped making that mistake. But I actually realized there was an interesting reason for that, which is in the world that I've lived in since my early 20s, actually since my late teens, it's a world of energy. It's not a world of form. And even though, of course, I have a body and I've been responsible for helping to put together two communities, so it's not like I don't understand how to manifest things. But to me, life is more about energy. And I realized for some people, life is much more about form. So their sense of self-definition is much more related to the body they live in. And so as a result, there's a kind of a more fixed reality that always made me think they were older than they have turned out to be. So now I'm very, 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 very careful, because you can get yourself in a lot of trouble that you can just avoid. But that's when Swami Kriyananda, by the end of his life, his body just didn't function. He took, and these are esoteric things, but he took a lot of karma onto his own. He used his body to work out a lot of karma. Karma for building Ananda, karma for establishing his guru's work, karma for a lot of us. And it's just an esoteric thing that masters can do. And so he had all kinds of very dramatic health. And when his medical records would go all over the world because doctors found him so interesting. and he was living on 3 continents, and so he was very interesting. But by the end, his body just hardly worked, and he had Narayani was his caretaker and companion for 4 years, or how long? Yeah, 4 years. And her husband came in at the end, and for him even to get up out of a chair or to walk, basically there had to be one on either side of him to just move from here to there. But as soon as he sat down and he didn't have to use the body, he just had as much energy as he'd ever had. And his face was just the same as it had ever been once the energy started flowing through it. It was the most remarkable contrast between the spirit and the body. It was really, really dramatic.
Because you could do a talk and suddenly switch off all the trouble you had the previous hour.
Yeah, as long as he didn't have to
talk.
Yeah, as long as he didn't have to walk or lift anything, the spirit could just flow through as freely as ever. More so in many ways. Yeah. Yes.
How do you attune to others' realities so that you know how you can help them?
To other people's how can you see here? Watch me, Shani. How can you attune to other people's realities so that you can help them? Very good. Yeah, she's a vicious taskmaster. You have no idea. This lovely lady. If I have any social media presence, which I have a significant one, 100% because of her. So I cooperate with her when I can remember, and she's a strong-minded person. I love you. Okay. But anyway, I'm so proud of myself. How can we attune to other realities so we can help them? There's multiple levels to it. So start with the fact. Whenever you have a compelling need to tell somebody something, you have to be really careful. Because the first thing you have to ask yourself, am I just, as we progress spiritually, our values shift progressively and become more and more refined. And it's very interesting how all these things weave together. In India, people talk about the caste system. And the caste system is, an absolute no-no in our modern way of thinking about the world. And the way the caste system has evolved over the ages, it's become a form of social oppression. But the actual concept of caste has nothing to do with society, has nothing to do with heredity, it has nothing to do with privilege. It's a definition of gradual awakening consciousness, and it's a way of understanding ourselves and the world around us. So there's 4 castes, the Shudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya, Brahmin, which is fundamentally by archetype. The one who works physically, the one who, the first caste is the laborer, the peasant, who just doesn't have much mental activity yet, but uses a strong body. The second caste, Vaishya, is the merchant caste, where we do things when there's something in it for us. And we begin to use our minds to improve our position, which is very positive. The third caste is Kshatriya, where we begin to understand that self-interest isn't the greatest value, principle is the greatest value. I need to have principle, what is right. I need to live according to principle. And I sacrifice. Kshatriya is the soldier who is willing even to give up his life for a principle he believes in. These are archetypes, bear in mind. The Brahmin is the priest. Okay, the reason I had to say all that is at the Vaishya level, when we're using our creativity to make things happen, each of these castes also has a characteristic about what they do. What is the characteristic of that caste to create security and happiness? Because security and happiness are what we all want. And security is also to keep suffering at bay, keep me safe. So at the Vaishya level, if we have ideas about how things should be, and we actively use our creativity and intelligence and energy to make the world conform to what I think it ought to be. So a great deal of political action comes out of the Vaishya caste. And even though it's motivated to an extent by ideals, it's also, as long as you behave that way, I feel insecure. So you must change your behavior. And it's a little tricky. You can see there's a lot of subtleties here. So now, when you're just working with friends or loved ones or relatives, you have to ask yourself, of course I care about you. I see that you're suffering. I want you to be better. I'm not saying that we're only selfish in this, but there's also a very large element that unless you change, I will suffer. And so when we're advising people about how they want to be, we have to be very careful that we're not just trying to make them do what I need them to do so that I will feel better. This is a very often what happens between the generations. You know, the parent is telling the child something that may in fact be extremely important and helpful for the child, but the child can feel that the parent is afraid and that they want me to behave differently so that they won't have to be afraid. I'm not afraid, but they're afraid. One of my friends said to me about his own mother, he said, you know, she feels that everything that might happen to me is going to be an insoluble problem because for her it would be an insoluble problem. She doesn't understand that I'm young and strong and catastrophes are adventures, you know? So I run out of gas 10 miles from town and I have to walk all night to get the gas. You know, for her what would she do? And so she's terrified that that'll happen to me. But for me, it's just an adventure. And so first thing we have to say is, are we actually thinking about the welfare of the person? Are we trying to ease our own suffering and make ourselves more secure by making them behave? Even if we're right, and that's the most annoying part, that you know you're right. But people have, you know, people have good radar. They can tell. They can tell whether you're actually talking about them or just talking about yourself, no matter what words you use. So first of all, you have to be at peace. You have to be at peace with yourself. And it doesn't mean that you don't love them and don't want to help them, but you have to not have your happiness be dependent on their behavior. Otherwise, you're just sunk before you start. And then you have to also not become enamored with your own, well, as my friend put it to me once, another friend who helped me a great deal, she said, Asha, you explain my problems to me more clearly than I want to know them. And it was true. I'm very clever. My perceptions are often quite accurate. But who was I talking to? You know, who was I talking to by just explaining everything to her when she was not interested in my point of view about her life? How did I even get into that position? Well, because I'm so interested in my own mind, and I'm so convinced that the perfect articulation is going to change the world. What does this have to do with the people I'm trying to serve? It's all about me, all about our own perspective. So the first thing you have to work on is, you know, not merely what could I say, what could I do, but what will they actually hear and what will actually help them. And here's another just part of that. When my parents passed away almost 20 years ago now, within a few years of each other, and when they first began to decline, I just sort of came in and took over their life. Because, of course, I could run their life better than they did, I thought. You can imagine, it didn't go over well. My mother said something to me like, I know a lot of people really respect what you say, but essentially she said, I don't. And at first, you know, by that point in my life, by the time she said that, I was completely at ease. I said, oh, Mother, how relaxing. You know, you don't care, so I don't have to think about it anymore. But at a certain point, I realized that what they were experiencing was the result of how they had lived. And it wasn't terrible. My mother had Parkinson's, and so that's tough, you know. But it wasn't, their life wasn't terrible. But what they were experiencing was the natural conclusion of the life they had lived. And every step along the way had been their karma. And so this was the natural expression of their karma. But it wasn't neat, and it wasn't tidy, and it wasn't going to be effortless. There was going to be some real challenges in it, as there often are, but not always, as people reach the end of their life. And I started asking myself, first of all, it may not feel like what I want, but it's the karma they've been developing all this time. And who am I to stand in front of it and say, no, 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 this isn't really what should happen? And try to use my willpower to just redirect a whole lifetime of their decisions. Again, like what an arrogant little twit I was, just not giving them any credit. And then from that, I had a really interesting realization. I don't eagerly look forward to hard times in my own life or in the world. You know, I can get really nervous. You know, I'm pretty courageous. And I'm much more courageous than I used to be. So I'm not like fundamentally afraid. Whereas I used to be fundamentally afraid. Now I'm not. Whatever karma comes to me, I know the grace will come to get through it, hard as it might be. And then I realized that I was afraid for everybody else. I was afraid for my parents. I was sure they did not have the ability to face their own karma. And I thought, whoa, is that ever insulting? And I realized that even though they could not have articulated that because they don't have these teachings, that's exactly what they felt. I was profoundly disrespectful to them because I felt that I knew better how their life should go than they did. And it wasn't even that we were parent and child. It was just wrong everywhere. And then here's another piece of it. And this is all about getting yourself organized, because once you're organized, it's obvious what you'll do. Was when people have challenges, they are learning necessary lessons in order to make them stronger so they can be more free. Why would I not want them to learn? Why would I even be afraid for them to learn? Why wouldn't I rejoice that they're getting the opportunity to learn? That's what I want for myself. I don't want to just be, put in a padded box and protected from ever growing. I want to face what I have to face. It has to be worked out now or later. So with my parents and with everyone since then, I changed my fundamental prayer from all the things that I was praying to, whatever you're trying to teach them, Lord, help them to learn it. And sometimes I would expand into give them the receptivity, the clarity, the wisdom, the courage to learn what you're trying to teach them. And then on my part, I would say, can you do it soon? And just like I'm running out of steam here. Maybe they're strong, but I'm really going down for the third time. And I could really put my passion into that. Okay, then when I'm with someone, with all of that understanding, you can really say, how can I help you? Inwardly. Not, what do I have to tell you? How can I fix you? How can I get you straight on this? How can I change you? How can I save you? You just actually, very quietly and still within yourself, you say, how can I help you? And you can pray to God, Guru, Divine Mother, however you feel it. You can pray, tell me what to do. But there's another way you can also pray. Every one of us has a superconscious dimension, and that superconscious dimension, which we're usually not that aware of except occasionally, that superconscious dimension knows exactly where we're trying to go and why we're trying to go there. So I have actually prayed not only for people, but to them. I'm just sitting right in front of someone, and I'll just, without making a weird scene of it, just in the course of conversation, I will sometimes visualize their spiritual eye, or I will feel energy between us like that, and I'll just say, what do you want from me? How can I help you? How can I be an instrument of your understanding? And sometimes I'll have an actual idea in my mind, and I'll say, should I say this? And then immediately that idea will vaporize. And 6 months later, I'll vaguely remember that I thought to say it. I mean, it's like I get such a big no that God doesn't even trust me to censor it, so he just, vaporizes it. And sometimes, I mean, has literally happened, should I say this to you? And then the person in front of me will ask a question and the answer is exactly what I wanted to say. Yeah, yeah. Or just the weirdest thing will pop into your mind. And you'll just sort of start. And always the other thing is, don't present your whole argument in the first sentence. I've watched Swami do this for many years. He would always just start slow. He would just, go a couple of steps, see if there was receptivity, push it a couple of steps more. Just because the door opens, don't assume that you have a full access to the house. It might just be that today we just start the conversation. So move slowly, keep asking, and pray to be used as an instrument. Just how can I serve? How can I serve? That's our growth. How can I serve? Not just me, but those I love, or the world that I love, whatever it is. It's so much fun because it just demands everything of you. And you can do this, you don't have to be with spiritually minded people, anybody in the world. You can be in the grocery store looking at the clerk. You can be in your office with your boss. You can be at the office with the people who work for you. How can I help you? How can I really serve you? Not just how can I do the least, how can I do the most? No encounter is insignificant. Every encounter we have is an opportunity to love and to serve. And if we don't use it in that way, it's not the fault of circumstances. This is how we change our reality. And if in every circumstance it's love and serve, then you always have something useful to do. Ooh, I just remembered one more part of an answer that I gave yesterday that I really wanted to add. The issue was I had talked about step-by-step change, and it might have even been an answer to the first question. And I mentioned how when the man in my community came to me and told me that he found it very tiresome to listen to me talk. And he was in a position where he had to listen to me talk all the time. And my spontaneous response to him, which was so marvelous, was I didn't think about being insulted. In fact, I thought it was so extraordinary that he would say such a thing to me that I was actually amused. But my first thought was just tremendous compassion for him, and that's how I expressed myself. Oh, you poor soul, I talk all the time. It must be awful for you. Okay, and I was pleased with that. But later I was remembering the end point of that consciousness, which by no means am I standing in. But I wanted to put a more serious tone on that. There's a wonderful book called The Hiding Place, which it's a tough story. It's about the Holocaust and concentration camps, but it's a great story. Corey and Betsy ten Boom were devoted Christians, devoted to Jesus with their father Casper in Rotterdam or Amsterdam, somewhere in the Netherlands, when the Nazis took over the country and the Jews became terribly endangered. And they were two spinster ladies and their elderly father, and they developed this huge underground network in Holland and saved hundreds of people, and eventually were betrayed and ended up in a concentration camp. The three of them, and the father died immediately. And then the two sisters were there. Betsy was the older sister, and the way Corey tells the story, Betsy was far more spiritually advanced and more elegantly everything than Corey. And eventually Betsy died and Corey lived and then had a long life. I'm sure she's gone now, just telling people about Jesus. And as Betsy said to her, because Betsy knew she was going to die, and just before she died, she said to Betsy, I'm going to die, you're going to live. After this is over, you need to tell everyone that no matter how deep the darkness, the love of God is deeper still. And they will believe you because you have been here. And so that's what Corey did. But here's the part that's important, that's relevant. When Betsy was talking to Corey very close to the end, and she's describing for Corey about, and Betsy's sort of indicating the whole camp, and there's all these vicious guards and all this just awful place. She said, everyone here has suffered so much, you're really going to have to help them and you really have to pray for everyone here. Now, Corey writes that she assumed that Betsy was talking about the prisoners. And then she realized that Betsy was talking about the guards. And what Corey realized was that the prisoners had not willfully put themselves into that state of suffering, but the guards had perpetrated the horror of the whole thing, and their guilt and their suffering would be much worse. But Corey just didn't even know how she was ever going to do that. But you see, it was the end point of my little episode with my friend, which is that Betsy was so expanded in her love for everyone that she didn't see these people as hurting her or evil, or she wasn't even associating her suffering with their actions. She just felt for their suffering and really wanted her sister. And that's in fact exactly what Corey ended up doing, because those people were so, shunned by their whole society. And of course, when they woke up from the miasma of what was going on, were horrified, many of them. But you see, that's how far it can go. Well, let's talk about Jesus Christ. He's being crucified, and he's looking from the cross at those who crucified him, and he prays, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And what he was doing, he was interceding for their karma. He was a great master. He was taking some of their karma. But his first thought was not, "You have caused me to suffer and die and be humiliated," but, "Oh, you poor souls, what's going to become of you?" Imagine. But how do you get there? Well, you just take one foot and you take a half a step forward. And if you just keep doing that, you become somebody else. Okay, those are the only two things that I thought of from yesterday. I wake up in the night. Oh, yeah.
It's concentration camps again.
Say again?
Concentration camps.
Well, concentration camps are just about the worst thing that you can imagine being inflicted, one human being on another. So they're not pleasant to contemplate, but they're super high-level PhD training grounds. Because it's easy, if everybody around you is really short and the weather's always nice, you can think that you're a pretty good person. But what happens when all of that changes? One of the interesting things I've read about about military, they've tried countless ways to find who's going to be a hero on the battlefield. And they have never been able to find a way to predict in advance who's going to be a hero on the battlefield. Because it's deep within you, that kind of power. And you can't psychologically test for it. You can't do anything. It's just who you are. And who we are on the deepest level often doesn't show. Or we look very different than we really are. And only God knows. And then we find out when we're pressed and the oil starts coming out, we find out. That's why one of the reasons why I've for a long time, I don't do it so much anymore, but I was always interested by extreme. I would read mountain climbing things and great escapes, and for years I did that. Finally I felt enough. I've done enough of this. But I did it because I wanted to, at least in imagination, test myself against real obstacles. And also it puts things in perspective. And Jyotish, is Swami Kriyananda's appointed successor. He and his wife Devi are the worldwide directors of Ananda. And many years ago, before they were even married, when Jyotish was living alone in the early 70s, and our construction was not entirely sophisticated at that time, and we built these geodesic domes, and we just had this horrible time because we could never get them to stop leaking. And at that part of California, in those years, we had like 70 inches of rain in 6 months. So we had these torrential rains. And Jyotish lived in one of these original domes, and it just leaked like a sieve. There was no other way around it. But he was very clever, and at that time, nobody had figured out a simple solution. In fact, finally, it just burned down. By that time, he was married to Devi, She happened to be off the property when this fire came through and a lot of houses were burned, including theirs, famously. When he saw her, she had to go through the blockades and the fire things and arrives there with their 11-day-old baby in her arms. And she's standing there like this. And Jyotish says to her, "Honey, you know that problem we were having with leaks on the dome? We just don't have it anymore." That was how he greeted her. But we had the leak. He had the leaks. And so I came in to see him one night when it was torrentially raining. And he had somehow gotten a funnel. I think the funnel was like about this big around, like 2 feet across. And there was one major place where the water came in, and he had stuck the funnel up to where the water came in, and he had run all these tubes down like this, and he ran it over and put it into the sink. And the sink, I think, just drained out into the ground under it, with no white water system, no gray water system. Just put it in like that. So the rain just poured in, went down the pipes, and then just went out the sink. And we didn't have electricity, so we had this little gas light. He's sitting in his little comfortable chair with his gas light on, and there's the sound of many rushing waters, just going by like that. And we all lived very primitive, so I said, "Jyotish, how can you stand this? It just seems so crazy." And he said, "Well," he said, if something is temporary, I can handle it. It's just temporary." He said, "And when you think about it, everything is temporary." Just there you have it. Just as simple as that. So, that's the power to choose happiness. And just think how, if you want to put, quote, money in the bank for your security, that's how it should be. All right, one more. Do I have time for? Yes.
I'd like to ask our relationship to our own soul aspect, that as we journey through this life and come to a point where we realise there's another aspect within that we are invited to work in, to be in harmony with, as opposed to how do you, like within Yogananda's teachings, is that expressed? How is that expressed? Our relationship to our own soul aspect.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. The question is, how do we? I'm going to rephrase it slightly. How do we live in harmony with and with the guidance from our higher nature instead of our ordinary nature, if you might want to put it like that, our soul nature, our superconscious nature, God's will, divine guidance. But what we're dealing with is we recognize that there are 2 dimensions. And one of them is the ordinary dimension that we see with the 5 senses and just live through. And the other is this, intuitive awareness that this is not all there is, that there's got to be more than this. I was 10 years old staring out the window of my parents' house at the neighbor mowing his lawn. And I had just had this feeling that if I stared hard enough at him, the superficial aspect of what I was looking at would dissolve and I would see the real nature of it. It didn't work, but I remember just trying really hard to break through. 8 years later, I began to understand what I was trying to do when I was 10. Okay, there's several different ways to talk about this. I'll start with this one. Yogananda, and subsequently Kriyananda in more elaborate way, talks about what we fundamentally have is our consciousness, our self-awareness. There's fundamentally 3 aspects to our consciousness. And the words he uses are subconscious, conscious, and superconscious. I referenced superconscious a few moments ago in a different question. Subconscious is not quite the way Jung and other psychologists use this. It relates to it, but you have to put that out of your mind and just look at it differently. Okay. Subconscious is where everything that we've already experienced and learned is stored. And this is why people can hypnotize you and you'll remember when you were 2 years old. You can even remember being born. Sometimes hypnotists can take you all the way back, or past life regressionists, they can take you to before you were born, because it's in you. Every experience that you have, for complicated metaphysical reasons, but it stays with you, because energy is not lost, it doesn't disappear, and we identify with our experiences, and that identification holds them to us. It creates a big piece of duct tape, and it's all pasted on us. Metaphysically, it's the chakra system, where the 7 centers that run up through the center of the body, all of our experiences are stored in the chakra that reflects the vibration of our consciousness when we had that experience. If we murder someone and we have a hateful energy, that's a certain vibration, and that vibration of hate stays in us. If we are murdered and we have a terrible fear, maybe of the person, of seeing anybody who looks like the one, or maybe I was eaten by a tiger, so I'm terrified by all tigers, or even the thought of tigers, or snakes if I was bitten and poisoned. That vibration, there's no cobra inside of me, but the vibration of remembering that fear and associated with a certain experience is a vibration within me. And so that's our subconscious. And that's what forms us. That's who we are, all of us. You know, we've had traumas, victories, happiness, sadnesses, heartbreaks, fulfillments, and it makes a pattern, which is the chakras, which makes a magnetic pattern of energy. And that's really what determines our destiny. This is our karma. If you go to my YouTube channel and type in chakras, karma, this is a fascinating and a very, very helpful subject to understand on a deep level. Okay, but this is the basic mechanism I'm talking about. So the subconscious is everything we've already accomplished. And of course, it's easier to just repeat what you've already done, because you're familiar with it, you know how to do it, I'm comfortable this way, this is what I always think, this is the way my mother did it, this is what my culture does. You know, just, it's easier to repeat. It's familiar. Okay? That's the subconscious. The superconscious is and the subconscious is not creative. It can reassemble all those different pieces, but it can't create an experience that's never happened, because the nature of the subconscious is to repeat. It's like programming a computer. It can give you, in artificial intelligence now, it can give the impression of free will, but all it can do is take what it has been told to do and put it together in a new way. Superconscious is where we're going, and it's where we haven't yet been, but it's how we're going to grow and become something that is our true potential. It takes more energy to create something new than it does to repeat what's already there. So it's always a little bit more challenging to go towards superconsciousness, but it's also magnificently exciting and fulfilling, because we can tell that we're doing something that is expansive. It's going to increase our awareness, and is why we were born. We weren't born just to play the same old record over and over again, because the happiness that comes from that is tiresome after a while. And so superconsciousness is thrilling, but it's more demanding. Okay? And both of these forces, you might call it our soul's destiny. We are the river flowing to the sea. Every drop of water has a destiny, and its destiny is to make it to the ocean, right? We, as individual entities, and the Sanskrit word for that is jiva, J-I-V-A, and it's a much clearer word than soul. Soul gets a little confusing. Jiva is the unique individuality that is the consistent thing through all of our incarnations, and that when we realize God is who and how we realize Him. That's why Jesus is always Jesus, and Yogananda is always Yogananda. It's the unique bubble that is now merged in the ocean, but it's still that bubble. That's the jiva. And soul is a good English word for it, but jiva is a little more clear. So every one of us has these two pulls within us. Superconscious is pulling us to our destiny. subconscious is saying, yeah, but it's a lot of work, like this. Or, you don't really want to go there. You don't really know what's going to happen there, just depending on whatever we've programmed this into, how we've built it. Conscious mind is the battleground. It's just where we stand when subconscious tells us to stay the same and superconsciousness says expand. And we're just always like this. There was a little girl in our kindergarten. We have a school. She was in the kindergarten, and one day she came and she was just horrible all day. And finally the teacher just took her aside and said, you know, what is going on with you? She said, well, every day I come to school and there's an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. Usually I try to listen to the angel. Today I decided to listen to the devil. At least she was honest, you know, it was something you could work with. But really all the time there's an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. And even, you know, devil and words like that are not considered very modern. But nonetheless, it's the truth. Because there's a piece of us that always wants to stay contracted. I'm going to go to bed today. I'm going to set the alarm for 4 a.m. When 4 a.m. comes, I'm going to spring out of bed. I'm going to, you know, open the window. I'm going to do the positive, energetic exercises. I'm going to do yoga. Then I'm going to meditate for 2 hours. And then I'm going to go out and have a run, you know, and then I'm going to eat just fruit for breakfast. You know, have it all set. Alarm goes off at 4. You said, and then you just reset it for 7:30. You know, it's just, we're always, and you can think about it, we're always just playing this thing out. So that's the beginning of it. You know, the relationship between me and my soul is a little confusing, but between the two aspects of my own nature, which is, will I put out more expansive energy to grow, or will I put out as little energy as possible and stay the same? And so the relationship between your soul and yourself is really simple. Always put out a little more energy. Always put out a little better energy if you can. Now think of it this way. There's always going to be a bottom and a top. And there'll always be a subconscious. There'll always be a superconscious. But you can move the whole thing up so that the bottom is not so low. And so every time you do a little better than your worst, you're helping. Every time you put out a little more energy instead of putting out a little less, even just a smidgen more, you're responding to the superconscious and you're reprogramming the subconscious. And pretty soon you can train the subconscious to be enthusiastic about the superconscious. You know, there'll still be a spectrum, but you can just gradually change it. And that's one of the reasons how you really transform, is because your subconscious gets on the side of the superconscious instead of always being against it. I remember when I turned 36, 12 years on the path, my subconscious had always been working against me. And it didn't suddenly become my champion, but the balance just tipped about that much, about the width of a hair. But it changed everything. All of a sudden, I was working with myself and not always against myself. Now, just one more small thing on that. You know, this is just at the end here. Here's another metaphysical part of it. This is the 6th chakra, which is the spiritual eye. When the way our masters teach us to meditate, we meditate focused here. Some people focus on the heart, some people focus at the belly, but this teaching is here for a very profound reason. And another thing that Yogananda adds to the science of the chakras is that this point, the spiritual eye, and the medulla here, that this is both of these points are the 6th chakra. They are our self-definition and our individuality, and they are the two choices of self-definition and individuality. Yogananda says, when the sperm and ovum come together, and there's a spark of a flash of light in the astral world, and a jiva decides to incarnate in that particular place, the first cell is right here. And this is the only part of the body, as I understand it, that can't be operated on. Because if you interfere with this is life, right here. But this, when we live from the medulla and define ourselves from the medulla, we define ourselves by those aspects of self that are limited, primarily the physical body. If you stop and think about it, a tremendous amount of our limited self-definition starts with the fact that I only have one body, right? And therefore, I have one gender, I have one heritage, I have one ethnicity, I have one set of talents, I have a physical age, I have only one set of, I have biological relations that are different than everybody else in the universe. I can say everyone is my family, but I only have one mother, one father, because of the physical body. Not because of the jiva, but because of the physical body. And so the medulla is self-definition based on limiting factors. And so most people live their whole lives that way. It never crosses their mind. And last night I was talking about all the incredible, violent, oppositional things that people are doing. I'm a Christian, you're a Hindu, you wrong, I'm right, because I can't be both a Christian and a Hindu because I only have one body as long as I'm thinking like that. In our country it's white Christian nationalism. You have to be an American, you have to be Christian, you have to be white. These people are out of their minds and they're totally trapped right here, like that. Okay? This is the jiva. This is individuality too, because the jiva is still individual, but this is self-defined by my relationship to infinity, by everything that makes me unlimited. And the entire spiritual path is to shift our self-definition from limitation to unlimited. So how to relate to our soul? Well, this is what meditation does. If you've read Autobiography of a Yogi, this is what Kriya Yoga is. Kriya Yoga is meditating in such a way that one's actual sense of self-definition, that one shifts from having all one's energy trapped here, that the energy flows through this point, because this life that we're in, as Swami Kriyananda said, he said, I never identify as Swami Kriyananda, but Swami Kriyananda is an event for which I am responsible, which is just a marvelous way to think of yourself, because you can't just become an airhead. Becoming spiritual doesn't make you incompetent. It's an event. And if you're in charge of the event, you have to make sure it goes off well. And so that's your life. You have a marriage, you have children to raise, you have money to earn. We have all kinds of things to do. You have to do it well. It's very important to do it well, because the reasons we don't do it well are not super conscious. But I define myself, I pass through, energy passes through that event. But when I say I mean this individuality. Almost all the misinterpretation of the Bible is because Jesus uses the pronoun I. And people think that he meant that body. Because most people say I, they're talking from the medulla, they mean this body. When he said I, he meant he was there, but he meant I as infinity. And you see, that's also why Betsy, Ten Boom, could feel such compassion for the guards, because, her body was dying and she was starving and she was going to die of typhoid or whatever she died of. And her father had died and her, just all these awful things had happened. But it was an event that passed through. She saw herself as one with the infinite, and therefore she was just as much in the hearts of those guards. And you see, at that point, it's authentic. It's not an affirmation. She's not trying to be nice. It's that she just literally, her pronoun I included them as much as it included the body she was living in. So that's how you relate to your soul. Self-definition just shifts.
Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach my heart to impart everywhere your delight. Sing of moon rays on the rain, sing that love's not in vain. Every grief, every wrong has its ending in song. Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach all men how to spin clouds of gloom into light. Without silence, what is song? Without night, where is dawn? Were it not for men's woes, who would smile at a rose? Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Let each tone silence groan, earth and heaven unite. Morning laughter, evening tears, snow and blossoms all fade. Joy must sing in the night to face change unafraid. Nightingale, nightingale, night.